I remember the exact moment I received the email that would change everything. It was a cold, grey Tuesday afternoon. I had just returned from a long seminar on transnational financial crimes at the university. My laptop was still open, notifications popping up in the corner of the screen, course announcements, social updates, the usual clutter, until one subject line caught my eye. It read, "Congratulations, internship offer from the National Financial Investigation Agency, Equatorial Guinea." I froze. For a few seconds, I didn't even open the email. I just stared at the subject line, reading it again and again, my heart racing. This was the one opportunity one never truly expected to get. I had applied to the program in a blur of ambition months earlier. It was an elite program, almost unlisted, and the application process was anything but ordinary. The agency, known formally as the Agencia Nacional de Investigaciones Financieras (ANIF), was one of the most powerful and mysterious institutions in Equatorial Guinea. It was shrouded in secrecy and prestige, especially because of its proximity to the government and its control over high-level financial oversight. At the helm of the agency was Baltasar Ngonga, a man whose name was synonymous with control, intelligence, and wealth. Even before applying, I had read about him. To many, he was a legend, untouchable, charismatic, a master strategist in the world of financial investigation. To others, he was something else entirely. But more on that later. Back in my tiny apartment that afternoon, I clicked open the message. It was real. The email had an official seal, a formal tone, and the promise of an intensive 3-month program in Malabo. I remember whispering, "Oh my God," under my breath and calling my closest friend, barely able to contain the excitement. This was it. This was the break. I had worked so hard for, hours spent buried in books, mastering international finance laws, case studies on corruption and compliance, late-night debates about ethics and power. It had led to this point. 2 weeks later, I was on a plane bound for Equatorial Guinea. The flight was long and filled with anticipation. I read and reread the onboarding documents during the layovers. I studied the organizational chart of ANIF, memorized the structure, the policy teams, the compliance division, and most notably, the executive suite where Baltasar Ngonga sat at the top. His office was literally and symbolically the highest room in the building, perched on the 17th floor of the headquarters in Malabo, facing the Atlantic. I didn't know then that I would come to dread that floor. When I arrived, I was struck by how beautiful the country was. The air was warm and heavy with the scent of the ocean. The city buzzed with energy and tension, a mixture of rapid development and quiet, invisible lines of control. I was picked up at the airport by a sleek, black SUV bearing the agency's insignia. It felt surreal. The first week was everything I had dreamed of and more. I was part of a small cohort of international interns, but I was the only one assigned to a confidential audit unit within the Financial Crime Risk Division. We were analyzing unusually large capital transfers from state-owned oil corporations to unnamed entities in foreign accounts. This wasn't just spreadsheet work, this was the real stuff. Our team had access to documents that never reached the press, names that had never appeared in court, and transaction trails that exposed hidden layers of global wealth movement. The office culture was intense. There were rules, unspoken and written. We had to badge in and out. Our emails were monitored. We were not allowed to bring personal devices into the archive room. And we never, ever asked questions about the executive office unless someone from that office spoke to us first. By the 4th day, I started noticing the whispers. People spoke of Baltasar with a strange mix of admiration and discomfort. Senior analysts referred to him as El Leon, the lion. There were stories about his connections, his influence, his ruthlessness in pursuing offshore shell companies. But then there were other stories. Stories about how he favored certain interns. That some interns got special meetings. That a few never returned to their home countries not because they disappeared, but because they were promoted so quickly they chose to stay. People dropped these stories casually, half joking, Like urban legends meant to warn but also to tempt. On the morning of my 7th day, it happened I was called into a meeting with Balthasar Ngonga himself. It came without warning. His assistant, a quiet woman in a red suit, appeared at my desk holding a formal memo. "You have been requested by the Director General," she said softly, placing the note on my keyboard before walking away. I remember staring at it. My hands were slightly shaking. I thought maybe I had made a mistake in a report. Or maybe he wanted to commend my work. Maybe both. I couldn't think straight. At precisely 2 p.m., I stepped into his office. It was massive and cold, with high ceilings, African art, and an oversized desk made from what looked like polished ebony wood. Balthasar stood by the window, his back to me, speaking into a phone in French. When he finished, he turned and smiled, gesturing for me to sit. "I've heard good things," he said, slowly. "Your supervisor says you're precise, analytical, committed." I thanked him quietly. He studied me for a moment, then walked over, not to sit behind his desk, but to lean against it, arms crossed, just a few feet from me. The air shifted. "I recognize ambition when I see it," he said. "And I know how rare it is to find someone who understands the weight of discretion." I nodded, unsure of where this was going. "I can make sure your internship turns into something much more," he continued. "A full-time position. A special contract. You'd never need to apply for work again. You'd live comfortably. With dignity." I tried to keep my expression neutral, but my instincts were screaming then. His tone darkened just slightly. "But loyalty," he said, "is not only shown through work. It's shown through presence. Trust. Closeness." That word closeness hung in the air like smoke. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. He stood and walked behind his desk, then added almost casually, "Let's have dinner. Just the two of us. We can speak freely, without walls. I want to know you." The meeting ended with him handing me a small card. A reservation at a private club. 8 p.m. that night. I left the office shaken. That afternoon, I sat alone in the archive room, staring at files but reading nothing. I felt sick. Not just because of what had happened, but because a part of me had seen it coming and hadn't wanted to believe it. The whispers. The rumors. The knowing glances from older staff. I never went to that dinner. I sent a message to his assistant, politely declining. I claimed I had a fever. The next day, I pretended to be fine. But I knew I couldn't stay. Not without risking something I wasn't willing to trade. My self-worth. 2 days later, I met with HR and told them I had a family emergency. My departure was swift and quiet. No exit interview. No final meetings. Just a one-way flight back home. Years have passed, but I still remember the power of that moment. Not just his power, but my own. Saying no. Walking away. Choosing discomfort over compromise. Balthasar Ngonga, still living in Guinea, he remains powerful, untouchable in many ways. But his reputation carries shadows of charm, of brilliance, and of dangerous patterns that continue behind locked doors. And me. I still work in financial intelligence. I still trace dark money, still audit suspicious transfers, still believe in the value of honest systems. But now, I do so with a sharper edge, and with the knowledge that integrity is more than a principle. It is a choice we make when no one is watching, and everything is on the line. I remember. And I never forget. I remember the first time I saw him clearly. It was on my second day at the agency. I was still jet-lagged from my flight to Malabo, still trying to understand how I'd gone from being a graduate student writing term papers about corruption to walking through marble corridors in one of the most secretive and powerful government institutions in Central Africa. The National Financial Investigation Agency was more than just an anti-corruption body. It was a gatekeeper. It had its eyes on oil money, foreign aid, illicit trades, and even the internal movement of cash between ministries. Everyone inside that building worked with purpose. Everyone understood that the air they breathed was heavier than oxygen. It was power. And at the top of it all was Balthasar Ngonga. He wasn't what I expected. I had read about him in articles, some glowing with praise, others written with carefully chosen words that tiptoed around darker rumors. He was said to be brilliant, precise, visionary. He was also, people whispered, a man who always got what he wanted. On that second day, I saw him walking past the conference room during a morning meeting. He was surrounded by aides, speaking rapidly in French, his hand making a sharp, downward gesture as he gave an order. For a moment, he looked through the glass panel and his eyes met mine. Not for long. Just a flicker. But something in me shifted. By the end of that week. I had received an invitation to his office. At the time, I was honored. Who wouldn't be? A week into my internship and already recognized by the Director General himself. I convinced myself it meant I was doing well. That I stood out. That maybe I was destined for something bigger. His office was on the top floor, and it was nothing like the rest of the building. It was warmer wood-paneled, filled with expensive artifacts, old books, and subtle luxuries. He greeted me with a charming smile and offered me tea, which I accepted, though my hands trembled slightly as I lifted the cup. "You have presence," he said after our introductions. "Not everyone here does. Some are very smart. But presence. That's rare." I remember blushing, laughing politely, thanking him. I was nervous but flattered. I wanted to impress him. I didn't understand the game yet. Not then. That meeting was just talk. We spoke about my background, my studies, my interest in international finance. He made me feel seen, not just as a file in HR, but as a person. When I left his office, my heart was pounding. I told myself it was admiration. The meetings became regular. At first weekly, then more. Always private. He asked me about my thoughts on cases, asked how I would handle certain investigations, and listened intently when I spoke. Sometimes, he leaned in too close. Sometimes, his compliments fell heavier, but I brushed it off. I told myself he's just like this. He's intense. He respects you. You're imagining things. Looking back, I can see how slowly, expertly, he was blurring the lines. The first time he kissed me was in his office weeks later. We had just finished reviewing a confidential report together, and I was standing by the door, ready to leave. He walked over, stood close, and said, "You're brilliant. You could be someone very important here, if you stay close to the right people." Then, without warning, he leaned in and kissed me. Not hard. Not aggressive. Just deliberate. Calculated. A test. I didn't kiss him back. But I didn't pull away either. I froze. My mind spun. I tried to rationalize it. It's just a kiss. He respects me. Maybe this is part of how things work here. When I left his office, my body was buzzing, not with excitement, but with confusion. I didn't tell anyone. The next day, he sent me flowers. A note: "You are rare. Don't doubt what's unfolding." And I didn't. I wish I could say I rejected him then and there. I wish I could say I reported him. That I walked away with my head high. But the truth is, I was young, far from home, ambitious, and in awe of the environment I was in. I wanted to succeed. I didn't know yet that silence could be a wound. So when he invited me to dinner at a private club that weekend, I said yes. That night, the boundaries crumbled further. Over the meal, he complimented my intelligence, my dress, my discipline. He touched my hand when he spoke. Then later, in the car, he leaned closer, his voice like velvet. "I want you to trust me," he said. "Fully. Let go of fear. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you, if you stay by me." When we reached the guest residence where I was staying, he followed me inside. I didn't stop him. I told myself I was in control. That it was my choice when he kissed me again. I didn't resist when he touched me. I told myself it wasn't wrong. When he told me to undress, I obeyed, not because I wanted to, not because I desired him, but because I didn't know how to say no to someone so much more powerful than me. I was afraid of disappointing him, of losing my position, of being suddenly seen as disposable instead of special. I kept telling myself, "You're lucky. He chose you." That's how it began, not violently. Not even obviously. It began with compliments and gifts. With promises. With invitations that felt like rewards. And each time, I told myself that I was consenting, that I was in control. But deep down, I wasn't sure anymore where my will ended and his power began. The relationship, if I can even call it that, continued quietly. We saw each other in secret. He gave me extra work, then praised me for completing it. He made vague promises of a permanent job, of high-level clearance, of a diplomatic role, but something inside me was cracking. I couldn't sleep at night. I couldn't look at myself the same way in the mirror. I started flinching when he touched me, even as I smiled through it. My thoughts grew cloudy. My stomach turned whenever his assistant called my name, and then, one day, a younger intern joined the agency. She was bright-eyed, excited, full of hope. I saw the way he looked at her during a staff meeting. I saw the exact same beginning. That was the moment I broke. I realized I was part of a pattern, not an exception. I was never special. I was just next. I packed my things that week and filed for an early withdrawal from the internship. I told HR I had family issues. They didn't question it. They probably already knew. I left Malabo without ceremony. No farewell dinner. No exit briefing. No goodbye from Botesa. I was gone before anyone could blink. Now, years later, I understand what happened more clearly. It wasn't love. It wasn't a relationship. It was grooming coated in prestige and wrapped in flattery. It was power, macht as mentorship. It was a system that protected men like him and made women like me question our own choices. I don't hate myself for what I did. I know now that survival sometimes looks like silence. That saying yes while afraid doesn't mean consent. That compliance isn't the same as choice, but I speak now because I couldn't then. Not for pity. Not for attention. But because someone else, somewhere, is walking through a marble corridor right now, clutching a letter that says, "You've been chosen," and she deserves to know what that really means. I don't remember the exact number of nights I spent with him, but I remember the feeling of every single one. It started with just one night, the night that changed everything. The night that blurred the lines so completely that even when I wanted to see clearly, I couldn't. After that first night, there were more. Some were long and quiet. Some were filled with tension. Some felt like stolen time. Others felt like nothing more than debt being collected. It wasn't love. But for a time, it felt close enough that I let myself believe it was. It began quietly after that first evening in the guest residence when he kissed me and asked me to undress. I went home the next morning in silence. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't even write about it in my journal. I didn't know what to call it, and part of me was terrified of naming it out loud. He didn't treat it like anything unusual. The next day in the office, he smiled at me during a briefing like nothing had changed. But later that week, he sent another invitation. This time, no assistant, no formal memo. Just a text message from a number I didn't recognize. "Dinner again. Same place. I want to see you." And I went, not because I wanted to fall in love. Not even because I wanted to sleep with him again. I went because I didn't know how to say no to a man who controlled the air I was breathing, who could lift me or destroy me with a single sentence. That dinner led to another night. And another. Over time, it became a pattern. I started spending weekends with him, first in the city, then at one of his private villas just outside Malabo. There, behind tall gates and hidden gardens, he showed me a different side of himself. He laughed more. He let his guard down. He told stories about his youth, about the early days of the agency when no one thought he would survive in politics. He was a different man in private, or maybe he just knew how to perform intimacy better than most. He started taking me on drives outside the capital, sometimes to quiet coastal towns, sometimes to secluded beaches. The first time we went to the shore together, it was a Sunday. The sun was impossibly bright. He drove us in a black Mercedes, his sunglasses hiding his expression, music playing softly from the stereo French jazz. Mostly when we arrived, the beach was empty. He had called ahead to make sure it was cleared. We walked barefoot in the sand. He held my hand like we were lovers. He told me how rare I was, how the world was full of forgettable people, but I had something different. A mind that cuts through glass, he said. And eyes that don't flinch. We sat under a shaded canopy, eating grilled fish and drinking white wine. I remember feeling strange, like I was living someone else's life. I should have been enjoying it, but there was a weight I couldn't explain. The more he gave me time, gifts, praise, the more I felt like I owed him something I didn't even agree to give, and yet, I smiled. I laughed at his jokes. I let him wrap his arm around me as we watched the waves. That night, back at the villa, he kissed me slowly by the fireplace. He was gentle at first, his hands warm, his lips careful, like he knew how to disarm. "You're safe here," he whispered. "No one can touch you when you're with me." But safety wasn't what I felt. What I felt was owned. In the office, the secrecy grew heavier. He'd summon me late, always when the halls were empty. He'd call me to his office after hours, locking the door behind me. Sometimes he kissed me there, against the wall, between shelves of classified reports. Other times, he didn't even speak, just touched me like I belonged to the room. I knew it was wrong. But I also knew that everything I had worked for, my future, my reputation, my standing, was now entangled with his approval. That's the thing about these relationships. They don't feel like choices. They feel like consequences. We spent maybe a dozen nights together in the city. Half a dozen more at the villa. And at least 5 weekends by the beach, where he tried to turn our arrangement into something romantic. He would bring flowers, food from private chefs, silk scarves, perfumes, and even poetry books. But no matter how much he wrapped it in gold, I couldn't stop feeling like I was trading something sacred for something temporary. I started feeling guilty when I wasn't available. Like I was disappointing him. Like I had to be grateful. That's what happens when someone powerful makes you believe that their attention is a gift. Over time, I started pulling away. I gave excuses. Said I was sick. Missed his calls. Declined his messages. But I could feel the tension growing. One night, after I refused to go to his office, he sent a short message: "Careful not to forget who brought you into this world." That was the moment I knew I had to leave. I waited 3 more days. Then I told HR I had a family emergency. I packed everything that night. My ID badge, my access codes, my phone. I left the next morning before anyone noticed. He never said goodbye. He didn't try to stop me because he didn't need to. He had already left his mark. Now, years later, when I walk along any beach, when I feel warm wind on my skin or hear jazz floating through a window, I sometimes remember those days. I remember his hand around mine. I remember the heat of his kiss against a locked office door. I remember the way his voice changed when he wanted something. But mostly, I remember the silence I lived in. The silence that felt like survival. The silence that let him keep doing it to others. I didn't love him. I loved the idea of being chosen. Of being seen. Of matching. But what I learned is this: when someone gives you everything so you forget how to say no, it's not love. It's control, and no amount of flowers, no weekend at the beach, no kiss behind closed doors is worth forgetting who you are. If you ask me what I regret, I won't tell you it was the nights or the silence or even the shame I carried afterward. What I regret, most of all, is how long it took me to understand that what happened to me wasn't my fault back then. I thought I was complicit. I thought I had let it happen. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I said yes when I wanted to say no, because I didn't know I could. Because I thought saying no would ruin everything I had worked for. My biggest regret is that I didn't trust my instincts earlier. That first kiss in the office, I felt something in my body recoil. But I smiled through it. I wanted so badly to succeed, to be liked, to be important, that I swallowed my own discomfort and let him define what was happening. I regret not walking away the first time he made me feel small in the disguise of making me feel special. I regret not speaking up, even if just to a friend. I regret hiding what happened for so long that it started to feel like a story that belonged to someone else, but most of all, I regret the girl I abandoned in myself, the one who wanted to be seen for her mind, for her passion, for her purpose. I let someone take that from her and repackage her as a possession, a secret, a reward. And if I could go back, if I were standing again in that hallway, holding that first invitation to his office, I would pause, I would breathe. And I would tell myself, you don't owe anyone your body to be valuable. You don't need to be chosen to be worthy. You already are. I would say no. Not just to him, but to the version of myself who thought survival meant surrender. I would choose differently. Not because I'd be stronger in the past, but because I'm stronger now, and I know now that real power doesn't come from who desires you or what title you carry. It comes from walking away when your soul is being asked to disappear. Would I be happy if Balthasar was sentenced to 18 years? Honestly, no. Not happy. Not exactly relieved, maybe. Validated. Seen but not happy. Because what happened to me and to others, I suspect, was never just about one man. It was about power, silence, and the way systems protect those who wear expensive suits and speak with polished words. If Balthasar were sentenced to 18 years in prison, it wouldn't undo the nights I stayed quiet, the years I spent doubting myself, or the career path I abandoned just to breathe freely again. It wouldn't erase the shame I carried for something that wasn't my fault. It wouldn't give me back the version of myself I lost trying to survive him, and part of me would wonder, is it real? Or is he still pulling strings behind concrete walls and iron gates? But yes, there would be a quiet, private justice in knowing that a courtroom finally named what he did. That someone finally said aloud, you cannot do this to people, and walk away untouched. It would be justice. But not joy, because joy would have been never meeting him. Joy would have been rising on my own merit, not under his shadow. Joy would have been freedom, from the beginning. So no, I wouldn't smile the day the sentence was read. But maybe, that night, I would sleep a little better. And that would be enough.